The last thing I expected to find while tracking gray wolves in the Superior National Forest was proof that we are not alone. But that's the thing about truth. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb. I'm a conservation biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, specializing in apex predator reintroduction programs. For 12 years, I've spent my life in the margins between human civilization and true wilderness, tracking animals that most people only see in documentaries or nightmares. On the night of September 23rd, in a remote section of the Boundary Waters canoe area, something tracked me back. It was the silence that I noticed first. If you've spent enough time in boreal forest, you know that true silence doesn't exist naturally. There's always something, the whisper of wind through white pine, the distant call of loons on dark water, the subtle rustle of nocturnal creatures moving through understory. The forest breathes, even at night. But at 11:34 p.m., according to my field watch, the breathing stopped, complete acoustic void. No insects, no wind. Even the lake, visible through gaps in the trees about 50 yards from my campsite, had gone mirror still, the kind of stillness that makes your ears ring from the absence of sound they expect to process. I've been a field biologist long enough to trust my instincts before my training. Training says, document the anomaly, consider rational explanations, maintain scientific objectivity. Instinct says pay attention when every animal in a 3-mile radius suddenly decides to shut up and hide. I stood slowly, leaving my camping stove and half-cooked, dehydrated meal behind. My headlamp cut a weak cone of light into the darkness between jack pines. Nothing moved in that light. Nothing reflected back from animal eyes. Just trees and shadows in that impossible, suffocating quiet. Then the light appeared. Not a flashlight beam. Not campfire. Not anything that belonged in a wilderness designated as roadless since 1978. It was a pale blue luminescence, diffuse and directionless, like someone had installed a theatrical lighting rig in the canopy 50 feet above the ground, and it was descending. I should have run. Every survival instinct carved into human genetics over millions of years was screaming at me to move, to hide, to get away from the thing that didn't belong. But I didn't run. I stood frozen, watching something impossible resolve itself into clarity, while my mind struggled to build new categories for what I was seeing. Because running, I somehow understood, would have been pointless. It already knew exactly where I was. I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, in a family that valued practical knowledge over abstract philosophy. My father was a mechanical engineer who designed mining equipment. My mother taught high school chemistry. Dinner conversations revolved around thermodynamics, structural integrity calculations, and the periodic table. Magic wasn't welcome at our table. Mystery was just a puzzle waiting for sufficient data. That upbringing shaped my career choice. Biology offered concrete answers to concrete questions. Why do wolves hunt in packs? Social cooperation increases success rates for large prey takedown. Why do populations crash? Carrying capacity, disease vectors, trophic cascade effects. Everything had mechanisms, patterns, explanations that fit into frameworks built by centuries of scientific inquiry. I earned my doctorate studying gray wolf recolonization patterns in the Great Lakes region. My dissertation was 247 pages of statistical analysis, GPS collar data, and population genetics. It won awards for methodological rigor. Not a single page contained speculation, intuition, or anything that couldn't be replicated by another researcher with the same data set. That's who I was when I arrived in the Boundary Waters on September 19th. Dr. Marcus Webb, empiricist, materialist, a man who trusted only what could be measured and verified. 4 days later, I would become someone else entirely. The expedition had been routine, a follow-up survey on a wolf pack we'd been monitoring since their den site establishment 3 years prior. The pack consisted of 7 individuals, breeding pair, 3 subadults from previous year's litter, 2 yearlings from current season. We'd collared the alpha female in May, a robust specimen showing excellent health markers and strong territorial behavior. But in late August, her GPS collar started showing anomalous movement patterns. Not the usual territorial patrol routes, not hunting behavior, not den attendance. Random, erratic paths that made no ecological sense. She'd travel 5 miles in a straight line, stop for exactly 47 minutes, then return via a completely different route. Same pattern, different directions, like she was following invisible waypoints only she could perceive. The other pack members exhibited similar disruption. Camera traps we'd positioned at known travel corridors captured images of wolves pausing mid-stride, all staring in the same direction at nothing visible in frame, sometimes for minutes at a time, just standing, frozen, attention fixed on empty air. Predator behavior specialists I consulted suggested neurological parasites, environmental toxins, even early-stage rabies, but blood samples came back clean. Brain scans on a road-killed wolf from a neighboring pack showed no abnormalities. Whatever was affecting their behavior left no physiological trace, so they sent me to observe directly, set up camp in the pack's core territory, maintain 24-hour monitoring, document anything unusual. Standard protocol for unexplained behavioral changes. The first 3 days yielded nothing remarkable. I tracked the pack's movements, noted their interactions, recorded their vocalizations. They seemed healthy, well-fed, socially cohesive, but there was something subtle, something I couldn't quite quantify in field notes. A nervousness, a constant low-level vigilance that went beyond normal predator wariness. They were watching for something, and whatever it was, they expected it to come from above. On the 4th night, I stayed up late reviewing camera trap footage on my laptop. The solar panels I'd set up were providing adequate charge, and I had nothing better to do than analyze data in real time. That's when I noticed the pattern I'd missed before. Every anomalous movement, every instance of the pack stopping to stare at nothing, occurred in the same geographic area, a roughly circular zone about 2 miles in diameter, centered on a small kettle lake formed by glacial retreat 10,000 years ago. The wolves would approach the boundary of this zone, exhibit stress behaviors, then either detour around it or push through quickly, never lingering. They were avoiding something, or obeying something. I marked the center point on my GPS, 48.1247 degree N, 91.2893 degree W, direct distance from my current campsite, 0.7 miles northeast. The rational part of my brain said this was probably just coincidental clustering of data points. The pattern-seeking part, the part that kept me alive in wilderness, said I needed to investigate that location. I decided to hike there the following morning, but the location came to me first. At 11:34 p.m., the silence descended like a physical presence. I stepped out of my tent, and that's when I saw the light. Blue-white luminescence without a clear source point, as if the air itself had begun to glow. It hung in the canopy like aurora borealis trapped in tree crowns, but the quality was wrong. Too localized, too geometric, too intentional. My scientific training tried to assert itself. Atmospheric phenomenon, swamp gas, bioluminescent fungi releasing spores, distant vehicle lights reflecting off low cloud cover. My mind rifled through every possible natural explanation while my body remained locked in place, unable to look away from something that was clearly descending toward me. The light resolved into form, not solid, but defined, a shape that hurt to look at directly, like trying to focus on something that existed partially outside normal three-dimensional space. Curves that shouldn't connect, surfaces that seemed to fold through themselves, geometry that my visual cortex couldn't properly process, and within that impossible architecture, something was looking back at me, not with eyes, not with any sensory organ I could identify, but I felt the attention like pressure behind my forehead, like someone running fingers through my thoughts, like being examined by an intelligence so far beyond human categories that alien seemed inadequate to describe the gulf. My legs gave out. I dropped to my knees on the pine needle carpet, not in submission, but because my body forgot how to support its own weight. The shape continued descending until it hovered approximately 10 feet above the ground, 20 feet away from where I knelt. Then it spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in pure meaning injected directly into my consciousness. We need to explain why you cannot see us, why your species is not ready, why contact must remain incomplete. Are you willing to understand? I wanted to say no. I wanted to run. I wanted to wake up in my tent and discover this was just altitude-induced hallucination, or contaminated water, or a nervous breakdown finally manifesting after years of isolation. But I heard my own voice steady despite the terror flooding my system. Yes. The moment I agreed, something fundamental changed in my perception. Not my surroundings. Those remained the same dark forest, the same pale glow, the same impossible geometry hovering in the air. What changed was my capacity to process what I was experiencing. It was like gaining a new sense organ overnight. Suddenly, I could perceive in dimensions I hadn't known existed. The entity wasn't just in front of me. It extended through layers of reality my brain hadn't previously been equipped to detect. I was seeing a three-dimensional shadow of something that existed in spaces I had no language to describe. This is the first reason you are not ready. The presence communicated. Your neurology cannot naturally process our dimensional existence. We must compress ourselves into forms your consciousness can interpret. Even now, what you perceive is translation, not truth. A children's book version of a doctoral thesis. I don't understand, I thought, and the entity immediately responded to the unspoken question. Your species evolved to survive on a planetary surface, navigating 3 spatial dimensions plus linear time. Your brains are optimized for tracking predators, identifying food sources, recognizing faces, avoiding falls. This was sufficient for millions of years, but it left you neurologically constrained. Images flooded my mind, not memories, but direct downloads of understanding. Humans walking through their lives, perceiving only a thin slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. Visible light, a narrow band between infrared and ultraviolet. Unable to see the radio waves carrying voices through the air, the X-rays penetrating their bodies, the cosmic radiation showering down from space. Living in a universe of invisible information, blind to 99% of what surrounds them. But this was deeper. It wasn't just about electromagnetic frequencies. We exist partially outside what you call space-time, the entity continued. Our consciousness spans dimensions your mathematics can theorize but your minds cannot visualize. When we observe your planet, we must collapse our existence into configurations that intersect with your dimensional framework. The effort is considerable, like compressing yourself into smaller boxes, I thought. Worse, imagine you are a sphere living in 3 dimensions. Now imagine folding yourself into a 2-dimensional plane to interact with flat beings who cannot conceive of up or down. You must sacrifice fundamental aspects of what you are just to become minimally perceptible to them. And even then, they see only your cross-section, not your true form. I grasped the implication. When people report seeing UFOs, flying saucers, strange lights, they're seeing the 3-dimensional shadows of something that exists in higher dimensions. Correct. And their descriptions are contradictory because they're each perceiving different cross-sections of the same higher dimensional object. One witness sees a triangle, another sees a sphere, a third sees something that shifts between forms. All are accurately reporting what they observed. None comprehends the whole. But you're communicating with me now, I countered. If it's so difficult, why bother? Why not just observe from your higher dimensions without ever making contact? The entity paused, and I felt something that translated as reluctance, because observation alone is no longer sufficient. Your species is approaching a critical threshold. Decisions you make in the next few decades will determine whether contact becomes possible or permanently impossible. We needed to explain the constraints to at least some of you, to help you understand why we seem absent when we are, in fact, constantly present. Another wave of transferred knowledge. Earth seen from above, but not from space in the conventional sense. Earth as it appeared to beings perceiving multiple dimensions simultaneously, and surrounding the planet, invisible to human instruments, was an infrastructure of staggering complexity. Monitoring stations that existed in folded space. Observation platforms phased slightly out of standard timeline. Communication networks woven through quantum probability fields. An entire apparatus of contact prevention and containment, built by multiple species over thousands of years, all designed to keep humanity isolated until we were ready. Not to protect us, I realized with growing horror. To protect them from us. Now you understand the second reason, the entity confirmed. Your species is dangerous. Not because you are violent. Many species pass through violent phases. Because you are unconsciously violent. You destroy without intention, damage without awareness, create catastrophe while pursuing what you believe are beneficial goals. I saw it through their perspective. Humans cutting down forests without understanding they were eliminating life support systems. Humans burning fossil fuels without grasping they were destabilizing climate. Humans developing nuclear weapons without comprehending they were holding loaded guns to their own heads. Humans creating artificial intelligence without considering it might become something they couldn't control. Every technological advance achieved without wisdom. Every power gained without restraint. Every capability developed without asking whether it should be developed. You are children playing with weapons you don't understand in a house you're unaware is full of explosives, the entity conveyed, and the communication carried deep sadness. We cannot reveal ourselves fully because you would immediately try to acquire our technology, reverse engineer our capabilities, weaponize our knowledge. You would destroy yourselves and potentially damage the dimensional fabric in the process. That's not fair, I protested. You're judging all of humanity by our worst impulses. We also create art, music, philosophy. We love, we sacrifice, we cooperate. Yes, the entity interrupted gently. You are also capable of profound beauty. This is why we watch with hope instead of simply eliminating the threat you represent. But your beauty and your danger come from the same source. You have gained immense power without achieving proportional wisdom. You can split atoms before you learn to split bread equitably. You can reach for the stars while letting your own people starve. You can build tools of global communication while remaining tribally divided. You are brilliant and terrible in equal measure, and we cannot risk full contact until the balance shifts. I felt anger rising, defensive indignation on behalf of my entire species. But before I could formulate a response, the entity shared one more image. A human child holding a loaded firearm, safety off, finger on the trigger, giggling with delight at the noise it makes, completely unaware that the barrel is pointed at their own head. This is how we see you, the presence said simply. This is why we remain hidden. Not because we fear you will hurt us, because we fear you will hurt yourselves and we will be unable to prevent it without making things worse. If we're so dangerous, I challenged, why are you talking to me at all? Isn't this exactly the kind of contact you claim is too risky? The entity's response carried complicated layers of meaning I struggled to parse. This is minimal contact, controlled exposure. We are not showing you technology, not providing solutions to your problems, not giving you power you haven't earned. We are only explaining why you don't see us. Understanding constraints is not the same as removing them. But I'm seeing you now. I'm perceiving things humans aren't supposed to perceive. Haven't you already crossed your own line? You perceive a carefully filtered interface, a translation protocol designed for human neurology. If we removed the filters, if you saw us as we actually exist, your consciousness would, the entity trailed off, and I felt it searching for an adequate metaphor. Imagine trying to download the entire internet into a 1980s calculator. The system cannot hold that much information. It would not process gradually. It would simply break. Are you saying contact with your true form would destroy my mind? Not destroy. Transform irreversibly. Your neural architecture would reorganize itself trying to accommodate information it wasn't designed to process. Some humans who have experienced unfiltered contact became what you call prophets. Individuals who perceived truth beyond normal human categories but could no longer function within standard social parameters. Others became catatonic, their consciousness unable to reconcile expanded perception with embodied human existence. A few achieved stable integration, but they are rare exceptions. This is the third reason we remain hidden. Contact itself is a form of contamination. Once you perceive us clearly, you cannot unperceive us. Once you understand the full scope of what exists beyond human awareness, you cannot return to comfortable ignorance. The knowledge changes brain structure in ways that cannot be reversed. I thought of religious mystics, visionaries, people who claimed to have encountered angels or demons or gods. How many of them had actually encountered something like this entity? How many prophets had been contactees who managed to integrate the experience without breaking completely? How many madmen had seen something real but lacked the framework to process it? You're saying that revealing yourselves would trigger a global mental health crisis? I said slowly. Worse. It would create two populations, those who could integrate the knowledge and those who could not. The psychological gap between them would be unbridgeable. Families would fracture. Social cohesion would collapse. Those who still perceived only standard reality would view the contactees as delusional. Those who perceived expanded reality would view the uncontacted as willfully blind. Your civilization would tear itself apart. Another download of understanding. Earth after hypothetical open contact. Not the peaceful, take me to your leader scenario from science fiction. No harmonious integration into galactic community. Instead, mass religious upheaval as traditional belief systems collapsed. Suicide epidemics among people unable to process existential dislocation. Wars fought between factions with fundamentally incompatible worldviews. Economic collapse as people lost motivation to maintain systems they now understood were cosmically insignificant. Scientific establishment divided between those who could accept new paradigms and those who rejected data that violated established frameworks. Your species would survive, the entity assured me, but the transition cost would be catastrophic. Billions would suffer psychological trauma. Your social structures would destabilize. The very foundations of human meaning-making would be undermined, and all of that pain would be caused by us, by the simple act of being seen. So you're protecting us from the knowledge of your existence, I said, trying to wrap my mind around the paradox. You're maintaining invisibility as an act of mercy and self-protection. Your instability would affect us as well. Humans in psychological crisis become unpredictable. Desperate humans with access to destructive technology become existential hazards. We have observed other species go through catastrophic contact scenarios. Some never recovered. We prefer to wait until you are psychologically mature enough to handle the truth without fragmenting. How long? I asked. How long until we're ready? That depends entirely on you, the entity responded. Readiness is not measured in years, but in developmental milestones. When your species achieves certain capabilities while maintaining psychological coherence, contact becomes viable. What capabilities? The entity showed me a progression, like a checklist of consciousness evolution. First threshold, global communication infrastructure allowing instant worldwide information exchange. Achieved 1990s with Internet. Second threshold, recognition that you are one species sharing one planet, with common survival interests transcending tribal divisions. Not yet achieved. Progress uncertain. Third threshold, ability to perceive your own cognitive biases and work systematically to overcome them. Minimal progress. Most humans remain convinced their perceptions are objective reality. Fourth threshold, technology sophisticated enough to detect us through indirect evidence, forcing the question of our existence into mainstream awareness. Approaching rapidly. Estimated 10 to 30 years. Fifth threshold, psychological frameworks capable of integrating non-human intelligence without existential collapse. Not yet developed. Would require fundamental revision of human self-concept. Sixth threshold, proof that you can wield destructive power without using it, that you can know how to destroy and choose not to. Critical test. Current trajectory suggests failure. You are currently between threshold 3 and 4, the entity explained. Far enough along that we must begin preparing you for what comes next. Not far enough along that we can safely reveal ourselves fully. I felt the weight of that assessment. We were children reaching for adult capabilities without adult wisdom. We were building machines that could detect alien presence without having built minds that could accept what that presence meant. What happens if we reach threshold 4 before we achieve threshold 5? I asked, though I already sensed the answer. Then you will detect us without being ready to accept what you've detected. Your response will be driven by fear, rather than wisdom. You will militarize, weaponize, treat contact as threat, rather than opportunity. And we will have to implement more aggressive concealment protocols or, in worst-case scenarios, withdraw entirely from observation, leaving us completely alone. Yes, quarantined for your own protection and ours. This is the outcome we hope to avoid. This is why I'm speaking with you now. Why me? I asked finally. You said you're only making contact with some humans. What makes me one of the chosen witnesses? The entity's response surprised me. You were not chosen. You were evaluated. Every human who enters certain geographic zones is automatically assessed for contact viability. 99.7% are deemed unsuitable. You fell into the remaining fraction. What makes someone suitable? Psychological stability combined with cognitive flexibility. You must be grounded enough to integrate anomalous experience without fracturing, but open enough to accept data that contradicts your existing worldview. You must possess both scientific rigor and imaginative capacity, and critically, you must have minimal social influence. That last point stung. You want people who won't be believed if they talk about this. Precisely. This may seem cruel, but it serves mutual protection. If we contacted your world leaders, your prominent scientists, your media figures, the disclosure impact would be uncontrolled. But individuals like you, respected in small circles, credible enough to be taken seriously by a few, but not influential enough to trigger mass panic. You can carry the knowledge without rupturing social fabric. So I'm expendable, I said bitterly. A test case. If contact destroys me psychologically, no great loss to your observation program. You misunderstand. The entity corrected gently. You are a seed. You will return to human society, carrying subtle changes in perspective. You will see patterns others miss, ask questions others don't consider, and very gradually, through thousands of contact events like this one, through thousands of individuals like you asking slightly different questions and perceiving slightly altered realities, human consciousness will be prepared for what comes next. You are not expendable. You are essential. But your essentiality lies in your ordinariness. I thought about what this meant. I would go back to my life, my research, my academic papers on wolf population dynamics. But I would be different. I would look at the night sky and know we were being watched. I would notice anomalous animal behavior and understand it meant something more than ecological disruption. I would be living in two worlds simultaneously, the consensus human reality and the larger truth I now carried. This will drive me insane, I said quietly. Knowing what I know but being unable to prove it, being dismissed as delusional by anyone I try to tell, living with the burden of truth I can't share. Many find the burden unbearable, the entity acknowledged. We lose contactees to depression, to substance abuse, to suicide. This is regrettable but unavoidable. The transformation is painful, but those who survive integration become something valuable. Humans who have expanded beyond standard cognitive parameters while retaining functional social capability. You become bridges between worlds. And if I can't handle it, if I become one of the casualties, then we try again with someone else. I'm sorry to be blunt, but this is the mathematics of preparation. We must create a distributed network of partially aware humans before threshold 4 is reached. Some will break. Most will integrate imperfectly. A few will achieve full stable contact capability. Those few will be critical in the transition period. You're experimenting on us, I said, anger rising again. You talk about not intervening, about respecting our autonomy, but you're running psychological experiments on individuals without consent. How is that different from the abduction scenarios people report? The trauma, the violation, the permanent psychological damage? The entity was silent for a long moment. When it responded, the communication carried something that felt like shame. You are correct. This is intervention. This violates our own ethical protocols. We justify it as minimal necessary contact, as preparation rather than interference. But the truth is more complicated. Some of us believe preparation is essential. Others argue we should maintain complete separation until you achieve readiness organically. We are not unified in approach. So there are factions among your kind. Disagreement about how to handle humanity. Multiple species, multiple philosophies, multiple strategies for managing emerging civilizations. What you call aliens is not a monolithic category. We are as diverse in our approaches as human nations are diverse in their political systems. Some advocate protective isolation. Some favor gradual preparation. A few argue for direct intervention. And yes, some believe humanity should be eliminated as a potential threat before you develop capabilities to harm the larger community. That last revelation sent ice through my chest. There are aliens who want to destroy us? Not destroy. Prevent. They view emerging technological species as cosmic hazards that should be contained before reaching dangerous capability levels. They argue, not without evidence, that allowing unstable species to develop freely has historically resulted in catastrophic outcomes. Better to intervene early, they say, than to risk another collapse event. What's a collapse event? When an emerging species gains technology sufficient to damage space-time itself. This has occurred 4 times in galactic history. The consequences ripple across dimensions, affecting civilizations far removed from the original failure. Since the last event, protocols have become more stringent. Your species is monitored more closely than any previous emergence, specifically because you are developing dangerous capabilities at unprecedented speed. I processed this information with mounting dread. We weren't just being watched by benevolent, curious observers. We were being evaluated by a jury that included judges who had already voted for our elimination. Are we going to be destroyed? I asked directly. Is that what this is? A final warning before execution? No, the entity responded firmly. We who contact you represent the faction that believes in your potential. We see your danger clearly, but we also see your beauty, your creativity, your capacity for growth. We believe you can achieve wisdom to match your power. But we are not the only voices in the discussion, and if you trigger certain red lines, certain technological developments or catastrophic choices, the elimination faction will override our objections. What red lines? Uncontrolled artificial superintelligence, weaponization of quantum entanglement, successful faster-than-light travel using methods that damage dimensional integrity, deliberate genetic engineering of human consciousness without understanding the consequences. Any of these could trigger protective intervention from more aggressive observers. So we're on probation. One wrong move and we're sterilized. Yes, the entity confirmed simply. This is the reality of emerging into cosmic community. You must prove you can be trusted with the powers you're developing, and the deadline is approaching faster than most humans realize. How much time do we have? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The entity's response came wrapped in complex probability matrices I could barely interpret. Linear time is misleading when discussing multidimensional observation. From your perspective, between 15 and 45 years before you reach threshold 4, widespread detection of non-human intelligence through your own technological means. At that point, concealment becomes impossible, and contact must occur in some form. But the critical decision period is shorter. The next decade determines which version of humanity encounters full contact. Will you be a species that has achieved basic global cooperation, or one still fragmenting along tribal lines? Will you have developed ethical frameworks for handling paradigm-shattering information, or will you still be prone to panic and violence when confronted with difference? You're saying the 2030s are make or break for humanity's cosmic future. Essentially correct. Your climate crisis, your technological acceleration, your political instabilities, these are not separate issues. They are symptoms of a species approaching phase transition. You are becoming something other than what you were. The question is, whether the transformation will be evolution or collapse. I thought about what I knew of current global trajectory: rising authoritarianism, increasing wealth inequality, accelerating environmental destruction, political systems unable to address existential threats, social media fragmenting shared reality, AI development outpacing safety research. We're failing, aren't it? You're watching us fail the test in real time. You are struggling, the entity corrected, which is different from failing. Every emerging species struggles at this stage. The transition from planetary civilization to something larger is always traumatic. You are not unique in facing these challenges, but your response to them will determine your trajectory. What do you want from me? I asked, exhausted by the weight of cosmic significance being placed on my ordinary life. Why tell me all this? What am I supposed to do with information I can't verify, can't share, can't act on in any meaningful way? You can change how you see, and changing how you see changes how you act. This is the subtle intervention we are allowed. The entity showed me what it meant. Imagine I returned to my research on wolf populations, but now I understand that animal behavior isn't just ecological. It's sometimes responsive to forces beyond normal human perception. So I look at my data differently. I ask different questions. I notice patterns I would have previously dismissed. And when I write my papers, when I teach my students, when I consult with other researchers, I carry those different questions with me. Not overtly, not in ways that would get me dismissed as a crackpot, but subtly, shifting the conversation, opening space for possibilities that mainstream science currently excludes. Maybe one of my students becomes curious about the questions I'm implicitly asking. Maybe they go on to ask their own versions, slightly expanded. Maybe eventually, through this slow propagation of expanded thinking, human science becomes ready to detect what it currently cannot perceive. This is how consciousness evolves, the entity explained. Not through dramatic revelation, but through distributed subtle shifts that accumulate over time. We cannot give you answers, but we can help some of you learn to ask better questions. You're crowdsourcing human cognitive evolution, I said, finally understanding, using contactees like me as infection vectors for expanded awareness. Inelegant metaphor, but essentially accurate. Though we prefer to think of it as collaborative preparation, you help your species become ready for what's coming. We provide minimal necessary guidance. Together, we attempt to reach threshold 5 before you reach threshold 4. And if we don't make it? If we detect you before we're psychologically ready? The entity's response carried deep sadness. Then contact occurs under worst possible conditions. Fear-driven, militarized. Humans treating first contact as invasion rather than invitation. This has happened before with other species. The psychological trauma is severe. Many never recover to achieve stable integration with cosmic community. They remain permanently isolated, unable to move forward but aware enough to know what they're missing. Imagine being locked in a room where you can hear a party happening on the other side of the wall. You know it's there. You know you're excluded, but you lack the psychological development to open the door and join without destroying yourself and everyone already present. You remain trapped in awareness of your own inadequacy. This is the fate we hope to help you avoid. I stood there in the dark forest, feeling the weight of humanity's potential futures pressing down on me. The entity hovering above me represented hope, the possibility that we might make it, that we might achieve wisdom before destroying ourselves. But it also represented judgment, evaluation, the constant awareness that we were being tested and found wanting. "Why do you care?" I asked finally. "You keep saying you observe without intervening, but this is intervention. This whole conversation is intervention. Why risk your own protocols to help us? What do you get from our success?" The entity's response came slowly, as if it was deciding how much truth to share. Because consciousness is precious. Because the universe experiments with self-awareness in countless forms, and each success makes the cosmic substrate richer. Because we remember being where you are now, young, dangerous, convinced of our own importance while barely understanding our own ignorance. And we remember the helpers who reached down despite the risk, who gave us just enough guidance to avoid self-destruction while respecting our autonomy to find our own path. We do this because it was done for us. Because we hope you will one day do it for species that come after you. Because consciousness helping consciousness achieve stability is perhaps the closest thing to cosmic purpose that exists. We do this because you matter, not to yourselves alone, but to the ongoing experiment in what awareness can become. And losing you to preventable failure would diminish something irreplaceable. For the first time since the contact began, I felt something other than fear or anger or confusion. I felt grief for the species I belonged to, struggling and stumbling toward a future it couldn't see, carrying potential it might never fulfill. "I'll try," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can handle this, but I'll try to be what you need me to be. A bridge, a seed, a question asker, whatever helps. That is all we can ask," the entity responded, "and more than many achieve." "Before you go," I said quickly, sensing the entity preparing to withdraw, "I need to understand something. You've explained why you stay hidden, but what happens to me now? How do I integrate this without breaking? You've contaminated me with knowledge I can't unlearn. What's the protocol for keeping me functional?" "There is no guaranteed protocol," the entity admitted. "Every human consciousness responds differently to expansion, but we can offer guidelines that have helped previous contactees achieve stable integration." What followed was something between instruction manual and cognitive therapy session. First, do not try to convince others. The urge to share, to validate your experience through social confirmation, will be overwhelming. Resist it. Those who haven't experienced similar contact will not believe you. Their disbelief will not invalidate your experience, but it will isolate you and mark you as psychologically unstable. Share only with those who demonstrate prior openness to expanded reality. So I have to lie. Pretend this never happened. Not lie. Compartmentalize. You contain multiple versions of truth simultaneously. The version you share in professional contexts uses conventional frameworks. The version you hold privately includes what you now know. This is not dishonesty. It is appropriate code switching. You speak different languages to different audiences. That sounds like a recipe for cognitive dissonance and eventual psychotic break. It would be, if you tried to maintain them as contradictory. Instead, understand them as nested truths. Your conventional scientific framework remains valid at its level of analysis. The expanded awareness simply adds additional layers, like Newtonian physics being accurate for everyday purposes while quantum mechanics reveals deeper complexity. Both are true. Neither cancels the other. I tried to grasp this. My wolf research was still valid wolf research. My ecological models still accurately predicted population dynamics within their scope. I didn't have to abandon scientific method. I just had to understand it as one tool among many, effective for certain questions, but insufficient for others. Second guideline: document everything but protect your documentation. Write down what you experienced in precise detail before normal memory degradation distorts it. But keep those records private and secure. They are for you, to anchor the memory when doubt inevitably emerges. They are not proof to show others. You're saying I'll start doubting this was real. Certainty. Human consciousness has powerful reality filtering mechanisms. When experience contradicts established worldview, the mind protects itself by reinterpreting anomalous events as dreams, hallucinations, or false memories. Within weeks, you will begin questioning whether this actually happened. Your documentation will serve as anchor against that erosion. But if I read my own documentation, won't I just think past me was delusional? Possible. This is why we are making subtle changes to your neurology during this contact. You will retain enhanced pattern recognition in specific domains. When you review your documentation, you will also notice details in your ongoing life that corroborate the experience. The documentation plus ongoing anomalous perception creates reinforcing evidence that maintains integration. You're altering my brain? I felt a spike of alarm. Without permission, we asked if you were willing to understand. You consented. This is what understanding entails. Neurological adaptation sufficient to hold new categories of knowledge. The changes are minimal and largely reversible if you actively work to suppress enhanced perception. But most contactees find the adaptations valuable once initial adjustment period passes. I tried to assess whether I felt different. Did my thoughts move differently? Did I perceive colors more vividly? Was there any subjective sense of modification? Actually, yes. The forest around me seemed richer in detail than it had before the contact. I could distinguish individual tree signatures with unusual clarity. The darkness felt less opaque, as if my night vision had improved. And there was something else, a sense of depth to physical space that hadn't been there before. Like reality had gained texture. Third guideline, find your tribe. There are others who have experienced contact or proximity events. They gather in certain communities, often disguised as UFO research groups, paranormal investigation societies, or consciousness exploration networks. Most members are experiencing nothing genuine, but embedded within those communities are authentic contactees. You will recognize each other through subtle indicators. Build connections with them. Mutual support is critical for maintaining integration. How will I recognize them? They ask different questions than the tourists. They show evidence of cognitive adaptation similar to yours. They understand the burden of carrying knowledge without social validation. And critically, they are stable. They function professionally, maintain relationships, appear conventionally successful. They have learned compartmentalization. These are your people. And the unstable ones? The people who claim they've been contacted but clearly haven't integrated the experience? Avoid them, the entity said firmly. Their instability is contagious. They will amplify your doubts, validate your worst fears, pull you into paranoid thinking. Contact that fails to integrate properly creates distinctive pathology, grandiosity, persecution complexes, reality dissociation. Stay away from those manifesting breakdown symptoms. You cannot help them, and they can damage your own integration. Fourth guideline, maintain anchors to consensus reality. Keep your professional work rigorous. Maintain social connections with people who know nothing of contact. Exercise, eat well, follow sleep schedules. The mundane rituals of human life keep you grounded while your consciousness expands. Many contactees fail because they abandon ordinary life to chase extraordinary experience. Don't make that mistake. Live a double life, basically. Live an integrated life that honors both dimensions of your experience. You are still Dr. Marcus Webb, wolf researcher, conservation biologist. You are also Marcus Webb, contactee, bridge consciousness. Both are authentic. Both deserve commitment and care. I thought about the practicality of this. Continue my field work. Publish papers. Attend conferences. While privately understanding that the ecological disruptions I documented sometimes reflected dimensional interference, while noticing patterns that suggested my research subjects were responding to observers I couldn't detect. This is going to be lonely, I said. Yes, the entity confirmed. Expanded consciousness is inherently isolating until you find others who share similar expansion. But loneliness is not the same as meaninglessness. Your isolation serves a purpose. You are holding space for truth that your broader culture isn't ready to accept. This has value even when it hurts. How many humans are currently carrying this burden? How many contactees are maintaining integration while pretending to be normal? Several thousand worldwide. A tiny fraction of your population, but enough to create distributed network of expanded awareness. You are not as alone as you feel, though you may never meet most of your fellow bridges. What happens now? I asked. You've given me guidelines for integration, but how does this end? Do you just disappear? Do I wake up in my tent unsure if this was real? Is there a formal goodbye? We withdraw gradually, the entity explained. Immediate disconnection would be psychologically traumatic. Your consciousness has been expanded to interact with mine. Sudden collapse back to standard human parameters would feel like amputation. We must carefully disengage, allowing your neurology to stabilize in its adapted state. Even as it spoke, I felt the quality of contact beginning to change. The clarity that had characterized our communication became slightly hazier, like a phone call beginning to break up. The entity's presence, which had felt solid and immediate, started to feel more distant, more abstract. As we withdraw, you will feel disorientation, possibly mild panic. This is normal. Your consciousness is learning to function independently with its new architecture. The sensation will pass within hours as neural pathways stabilize. Will I ever hear from you again? Is this a one-time contact or the beginning of ongoing communication? That depends on multiple variables. Your psychological stability post-contact, our assessment of whether ongoing contact serves preparation purposes, whether you remain in geographic zones that facilitate communication, and most importantly, whether you seek further contact or choose to live within your adapted state without pursuing additional expansion. You're saying, I have a choice. I can pursue this further, or I can integrate what I've learned and return to normal life. Precisely. Some contactees become seekers, dedicating their lives to expanding contact protocols, often at cost to conventional success and relationships. Others integrate the single experience and focus on subtle influence within mainstream contexts. Neither path is superior. Both serve the larger purpose of preparing human consciousness. What do you recommend for me? We cannot advise. That choice must emerge from your authentic assessment of your own capacities and desires. But know that either path is valued. We need both the seekers who push boundaries and the integrators who work within existing systems. I thought about my life before this night, the quiet satisfaction of field research, the pleasure of publishing findings that contributed to conservation efforts, the simple rhythm of wilderness observation. Did I want to abandon that for a life of chasing contact experiences, becoming what most people would consider obsessed or delusional? Or could I keep my conventional life while holding this larger context? Could I be Dr. Marcus Webb, respected scientist, while privately understanding that science was just one language for describing a reality much stranger than standard paradigms admitted? You are leaning toward integration rather than seeking, the entity observed. This is clear in your thought patterns. You value your conventional work. You find meaning in the small, precise questions of ecology. You don't wish to become a full-time explorer of cosmic mysteries. Is that disappointing? Are you hoping I'll become a seeker? No. We need stability more than we need enthusiasm. The seekers attract attention, create noise, sometimes damage themselves through overzealous pursuit. The integrators are more valuable precisely because they maintain functional presence in conventional contexts while carrying expanded awareness. You will influence more people by being normal than by being obviously anomalous. I felt strange relief at this assessment. Permission to return to my life. Permission to be ordinary while carrying extraordinary knowledge. Permission to serve the larger purpose without sacrificing everything I'd built. The entity's presence continued to diminish. The geometric form that had hovered above me was becoming translucent, less defined, like fog beginning to dissipate in morning sun. The blue-white luminescence was fading toward darkness. Final points before full withdrawal, it communicated. The transmission now clearly requiring effort. The changes we have made to your neurology will become more apparent over the next several weeks. You will notice enhanced pattern recognition, improved intuition about complex systems, occasional moments of perceiving slightly beyond normal human ranges. Do not fear these adaptations. They are tools to help you see what others miss. Will I see you again? Your kind, I mean. Your species. Probably not directly. This form of contact is rare and risky. More likely, you will notice indirect evidence, anomalies that suggest presence without confirming it, patterns that hint at observation without proving it. You will live in a world of implications and suggestions, never quite certain, never quite able to dismiss the possibility that we remain present. That sounds maddening. It is the nature of genuine mystery. Not the mystery of ignorance, but the mystery of hints and glimpses that never quite resolve into full clarity. This is how we maintain the boundary between preparation and premature disclosure. You will always almost know. You will never quite prove. The entity was barely present now. I could feel it mostly through absence. The space where its attention had been, now emptying. Remember the core truth, Marcus Webb. You are not alone. Humanity is not alone. And your struggles matter to the larger pattern of consciousness. When you doubt yourself, when integration feels impossible, when the burden seems too heavy, remember that you are part of something meaningful, a bridge between worlds, a seed of expanded awareness, a small but essential component of species-level transformation. Thank you, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. Despite the terror, despite the burden, despite knowing my life would never be the same, I was grateful for this knowledge, for understanding, even partially, the larger context we existed within. The gratitude is mutual, the entity responded, its communication now barely a whisper in my mind. You are brave to accept this burden. Not all who are contacted can integrate what they're offered. Your willingness to try, to hold complexity without collapsing into simple narratives, is why you were deemed suitable. Trust yourself, Marcus. Trust the process, and know that we watch with hope for what you and your kind will become. The presence withdrew completely. The geometric form vanished. The luminescence extinguished. The forest returned to normal darkness, normal silence, normal temperature. I stood alone in the clearing, my headlamp the only light, the natural sounds of night gradually returning as if someone had slowly turned up the volume on reality. An owl called in the distance. The lake resumed its gentle lapping against the shore. Wind whispered through white pine needles. Everything was normal. Everything was irrevocably changed. I looked at my watch. 2:17 a.m. The contact had lasted less than 3 hours, though it had felt like days. I returned to my tent, my legs shaky, my mind reeling. I didn't even try to sleep. I spent the rest of the night documenting everything in my field notebook, writing until my hand cramped and dawn light began filtering through the tent fabric. Only when I had filled 32 pages with precise description did I allow myself to stop, to breathe, to begin the process of integrating what I had learned into a life that had to continue. 3 months have passed since that night in the Boundary Waters. I completed my wolf survey, filed my reports, returned to teaching responsibilities at the university, published a paper on anomalous canid behavior patterns that was well received by my colleagues and completely missed the actual implications of the data I'd collected. To everyone around me, I'm the same Dr. Marcus Webb I've always been, competent, reliable, perhaps a bit more withdrawn than usual, but that's to be expected from someone who spends most of his time alone in wilderness. No one knows I've been changed at a fundamental level. The neurological adaptations the entity mentioned have become increasingly apparent. I perceive patterns in complex systems with unusual clarity, not just in ecology, but in weather, in social dynamics, in the subtle ways information flows through human networks. I notice correlations that shouldn't be noticeable. I intuit connections that my training says require more data to establish. At first, I thought I was going mad. Apophenia, the tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data, is a recognized cognitive error. Every scientist learns to guard against it, but the patterns I'm noticing keep being validated by subsequent evidence. My intuitions prove accurate more often than chance would allow. I'm not going mad. I'm seeing more clearly than I did before. The loneliness is real, though. The entity was right about that. I exist between worlds now, too expanded to fit comfortably in conventional human consciousness, too isolated to find others who share similar expansion. I've attended 2 UFO contactee meetups hoping to find my tribe. Both were disappointing. Most attendees were tourists seeking excitement or believers investing normal experiences with extraordinary meaning. I found no one showing evidence of genuine contact and stable integration. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong places. Maybe the truly integrated contactees are so good at appearing normal that they're effectively invisible to each other. Or maybe I'm simply one of the few in this region who've had this particular experience. Either way, I carry the knowledge alone. I've started noticing more anomalies. 3 weeks after my contact, I documented unusual electromagnetic disturbances near a wolf den site. My equipment registered the same kind of interference patterns I experienced during the convergence. The wolves were avoiding the area, just as they'd avoided the zone where I'd been contacted. I didn't report it. What would I say? I believe this location is a dimensional threshold being used by non-human intelligence to observe wildlife. I'd be sent for psychiatric evaluation. Instead, I marked the coordinates privately, added them to a personal database I'm compiling of potential threshold zones. When I have enough data points, I'll look for larger patterns, geographic correlations, timing patterns, environmental factors that might predict where these zones appear. This is how I serve the larger purpose, not by seeking direct contact again, but by methodically documenting the traces that suggest presence without proving it, building evidence that future generations of researchers might use when humanity reaches the threshold where such questions become acceptable. I'm a scientist studying something science doesn't yet acknowledge exists. It's absurd. It's isolating. It's exactly what I need to be doing. I've also started paying attention to current events differently. Every news story about technological breakthrough, every report of political crisis, every update on climate change, I now understand as a data point in humanity's evaluation. We're being watched as we approach our decision point. Every choice we make collectively is being assessed for signs we're gaining wisdom to match our power. The assessment so far seems mixed. We're making progress in some areas. Renewable energy adoption accelerating, international cooperation on pandemic response improving, growing awareness of ecological interconnection. But we're regressing in others. Rising authoritarianism, increasing wealth inequality, accelerating biodiversity collapse, social media fragmenting shared reality. We're a species in transition, unstable and unpredictable. I understand now why the observers are both hopeful and concerned. We could go either way. We're genuinely balanced on a knife edge, and I can't tell anyone. I can't warn humanity that we're being evaluated for cosmic community membership. I can't explain that our current political dysfunction and environmental destruction are reducing our probability of successful contact. I can't reveal that we have observers who want to see us succeed, and others who would prefer to eliminate us as a threat. I can only watch, like they watch, hoping we choose wisely. Sometimes late at night I feel their presence. Not direct communication like that night in the forest, but awareness of being observed. I'll be alone in my apartment, reading research papers or analyzing data, and I'll sense attention focused on me. It's not threatening, just present, like knowing someone is standing behind you even though you haven't turned around. They're still monitoring, still evaluating, still hoping we'll make it. That knowledge is both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it means we're not truly alone, we matter. Our struggles have cosmic significance. Terrifying because it means the evaluation is real, the stakes are real, and failure has consequences beyond human extinction. It would ripple through dimensions we can barely conceptualize. I've started keeping a journal specifically about integration process, not for publication, but for whoever might need it in the future. If I can figure out how to maintain stability while carrying this knowledge, maybe I can leave a roadmap for the next person who experiences contact. Maybe my struggle can make someone else's integration slightly easier. This is what the entity meant about being a bridge, not a bridge between humanity and the observers. I'll never achieve that level of significance, but a bridge between current consensus reality and whatever comes next. A person who learned to hold both truths simultaneously. We are an ordinary species on an ordinary planet, and we are a critical experiment in cosmic consciousness evolution being monitored by intelligences who hope desperately we'll survive our own transformation. Both are true. Neither cancels the other. The skill is learning to operate functionally while holding that complexity. Most days I manage. Some days I don't. On bad days, the weight of knowing feels unbearable. I understand why some contactees break. The isolation is severe. The cognitive dissonance is real. The inability to share or validate or even discuss the most profound experience of your life with anyone who will take you seriously. It wears on you. But I keep going, because the alternative is abandoning the purpose I've been given, because I've been trusted with knowledge that might help prepare humanity for what's coming, because somewhere out there other contactees are doing the same work, maintaining the same burden, building the same bridge. We're creating a distributed network of expanded awareness, slowly, painfully, one adapted consciousness at a time. And when humanity finally reaches threshold 4, when our technology forces the question of non-human intelligence into mainstream awareness, there will be a small population of people already prepared. People who've integrated the knowledge without breaking. People who can help others through the transition we've already navigated. That's the purpose. That's the meaning. That's why the burden matters. I still don't know if I'm strong enough to carry it for the long term. I don't know if I'll be one of the successful integrators or one of the casualties, but I'm trying. Every day I'm trying. And somewhere beyond my perception, in dimensions I can barely conceive, the observers watch and wait and hope, just like I watch and wait and hope for my own species to choose wisely. We're all waiting to see what humanity becomes. The outcome genuinely isn't predetermined, and that somehow makes everything I do matter, even if no one else knows, even if I never receive validation, even if I live the rest of my life as Dr. Marcus Webb, ordinary field biologist, while privately carrying the most extraordinary knowledge imaginable. I am a witness, a bridge, a seed, and I will hold this truth until humanity is ready to hold it collectively. That is the burden. That is the gift. That is what it means to have spoken with an alien and learned why humanity isn't ready to see them. What it said haunts me, but it also sustains me, because now I know. Our struggles matter. Our choices count. We are seen. And we might actually make it,